All right, hi, this is Stacey Maho. I'm here today with Jenny Topping, and she's joining us from California. Super excited to have her here today. We actually recently crossed paths on Facebook, and there were some things that she put out that I was very interested in and caught my attention, so I had to look her up and kind of see what she was about. Is involved with gold medal training, and we just kind of got together on Messenger and decided to do a little chat here for you. So Jenny, why don't you go ahead and tell us? I know that recently I saw on Facebook you posted about workouts, and that's something that I think a lot of former athletes or current athletes have in common, is that we don't just practice during practice time, but there's other stuff that goes on. So I was wondering, out of curiosity, what's your favorite either exercise or piece of equipment at the gym?
My favorite, if I were to use a machine, would be the Airdyne Bike. It's called an Airdyne Bike. It's just got a wheel on the side, pull with your hands, and you can ride for calories, you can ride for time, but I mainly do a lot of short sprinting on it, like 10 to 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, get your heart rate through the roof.
Yeah.
It is very nice. And second to that, I love the barbell.
Yeah.
Powerlifting, lifting, explosive movements, extremely important for athletes.
Yeah. So, okay, so first of all, Airdyne is a tough thing to ride. Like, that's not an easy, like, that one's rough. So short sprints on there definitely get your heart rate going. As far as the barbell is concerned, what's your favorite movement with that?
I love the clean. I
Yeah.
love the clean and jerk. I love the snatch. Now that I'm no longer an athlete or throwing a ball anymore, I don't have to worry about my shoulders as much. So I love movements that sort of take a little more time to get good at. The snatch was one that I'd never done as an athlete, so it was fun to try to learn to master that movement. I don't know if you ever mastered something like that without a lot of training, but explosive movements, power clean and jerk, snatch, my favorites.
Yeah, my friends tease me because they're like, oh, I know if you did it, there's probably cleans in there. So it's one of my favorites too. So that's cool. Anyway, for those people who may not know who you are, could you give us a little bit of your background, like how you got started in softball, where you grew up, and your kind of history with the game?
Yeah, I grew up in Southern California. Something people don't know about me is that I'm a left-handed catcher. I like to tell that story because I had people tell me my whole life that I couldn't do it. And so I kind of got to fight against that my whole life. So I played at Washington to start in college, and then transferred to Cal State Fullerton. I was a four-time All-American, Olympic gold medalist on the 2004 team. I was fortunate to play in our USA Pro League for Akron Racers and won a professional title there, as well as I played 3 seasons over in Japan. So I've only been retired for about 4 years now. So I had a long history of playing. I learned a lot of lessons, and I was fortunate to be given a gift and had the support to get there. For sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. So when I got to college, the catcher that actually, there were 2 catchers that came in, but one of them was from Colorado. She was also a lefty catcher. So I think that you guys have some advantages too that righty catchers don't have. So it is a little bit tougher in some situations, but in others, like that throw down to first is a lot easier, I think, and like for pickoffs. But I wanted to ask also about, as far as now being retired, what's been the toughest thing about that transition from going from being an athlete for so long and playing the game to now not being competitive anymore in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I tried not to make who I was as a softball player my identity, but I don't know how you avoid that. So it's been an unraveling for the past 4 years, or unraveling sort of sounds negative, but it's been an understanding of, my identity is not wrapped in who I was as an athlete. I'm much more than that. And so it's been an interesting journey to learn who I am outside of an athlete, and to let go of some of the ego that I needed in order to get me to where I was. I mean, ultimately, to play at the highest level, you have to have a large ego. You have to be very focused on you and focused on one mission and one goal. And so I'd say there's a lot of experiences that I didn't get to do, and there were a lot of things that I set aside in my life because I was on this mission to just be the best in what I was doing. So it's been an interesting journey to learn myself and my identity in God, and not necessarily my identity in an athlete. So it's an interesting process. It's a beautiful process.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think a lot of athletes and even people who've maybe been competitive in the past and now are living, a different part of their life, a different season of life. I'm discovering that there's a lot of things that were really helpful to me as an athlete that now it's kind of not the best approach to everything necessarily. So it's been, I can only imagine what it's been like to go to the Olympics and do, gold medals and win professional championships. And then now to go into different parts of life is definitely quite a transition. So the other question that I like to ask anyone who comes on the show, because it's called Eating Curveballs for Breakfast, is about a curveball that you've been thrown and kind of like what your feelings or thoughts were about it, and maybe what you've learned from that experience. Whether it doesn't have to be a softball thing, it could be anything.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you might be the first person to ever hear this out of my mouth, but I actually don't know how I feel about athleticism anymore. And I'll tell you this why, is because it really creates division in the sense of you have to think you're better than someone else. And so my whole life, that's what I needed, or I thought I needed in order to be successful, is I had to think I was better than other people. And so it was, an inclusion of my teammates, but it was an exclusion of everyone else. And so now what's happening is I'm coaching privately and in small groups. And what I'm seeing is, that's not necessarily what I want to promote in life. And so I'm having a bit of this internal conflict of how do I teach the game that I love within athleticism that teaches you that you have to think you're better than others. And so it's a journey that I don't have the answer to yet. But I'm definitely, one of my hums or my passion projects right now is to get coaches to realize, are they coaching through their ego, or are they coaching to create beautiful humans? And that's kind of my passion project at this point.
Yeah, I love that so much, because I've also felt like growing up, the entire childhood growing up, it's like I always felt like competition or being competitive meant being better than other people, like trying to be better than other people. And recently I learned that the root word for compete actually means to strive together, to where like myself and my opponent, we're actually working our butts off so that we can bring out the best in each other. And when I bring my best and they bring their best, we both actually get better. And then everyone, it's better off because of it. And so I didn't even hear that until I became an adult. And I'm like, why aren't we told this when we're a little younger? Because that's a totally different way of looking at it. And it still has that air of like, we're still coming and bringing the very best we have. But the idea of like striving together, even with your opponents, because we all raise each other up in that sense, because we're bringing out the best in one another, is very different to me. And then I've read books and talked about like, this idea of like you're talking about competing with everyone else, the idea that like if I'm winning, that means someone else has to lose. And in life, I just don't feel like that's like, we can both be successful, you and I. We can both have families, we can both have houses. It's not like because I have a family, you can't have one kind of thing. And when you're in competition for so long and everyone's going for this one championship where there is only one winner, it's very different thought processes. So I've also been kind of thinking about that sort of thing in the past few years too. So it's very interesting to hear that coming from you as well. And the other thing that I was interested in was your comments about safe sport and hopefully my connection, okay. And what you learned from their classes or their trainings and programs, and you spoke about or encouraged other coaches to go through them. So what is it that you love so much about it? And what do you think other coaches can benefit from hearing what Safe Sport has to offer?
Well, I think that Safe Sport is really getting to a root issue, I think, that is a little bit behind in athleticism. You know, I think what's happening is the old theory was that we need to, you know, verbally, and I think even in the past physically abuse people in order to, athletes, in order to get them to do what we want for them to be successful. And so what I mean by that is fear-based coaching versus motivation coaching, right? Not to get too philosophical, but there are two different ways to motivate people, and there's probably more than that, but one is fear. So fear-based is if you do not do this, you know, I'm going to make sure that you run until you puke, right? And so you put the fear into people, and in my case, it's young women, right? And so then they're being motivated by something that's very negative. And ultimately what that does to them is that creates inside of them a sense of I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. And then what you see them go on to do is, you know, some of them go on and have great successful lives. For others, they continue to feel like they're not enough, they're not good enough. And so Safe Sport is really doing a good job of promoting the fact that we need to positively motivate our women, our boys to be successful, and for them to know that they're not, their identity is not wrapped in you know, how they do in the box. It's who they are is not connected to whether they strike out or not. You know, they're great and they're enough just the way they are, and through the positive coaching, they can succeed on the field and in life. And I think that this is a step that's been needed to be taken for a long time in athleticism. And I just think, unfortunately, we've said it's okay for too long that that fear-based coaching is okay. I think on top of that, their coaches need to ask themselves, am I driven by ego, or am I driven by creating great athletes who are confident in people? And, you know, am I motivating with fear or with, you know, positive reinforcement? Because the truth is, any kid, if you tell them you can do anything if you set your mind to it, and if you can release them of the fear of failure and just saying, I believe in you, you are who I want in the box. Yeah. You see kids do things that they never thought that they were even capable of. So releasing them of that fear, you know?
Yeah, I think, this is a huge, huge thing. And I think you're right, as far as like, for so long, it's just how it's been. And like, I think possibly you and I have both, I would guess, experienced that as athletes, where that's how we were coached. And so there's a lot of coaches who are coaching now where that's all they know, really. Nobody's shown them anything different. So I love that you're doing that for your athletes, and that there's actually an organization out there that's kind of showing coaches how to do it, or even saying it's possible. Because I think a lot of people don't even think it, like, people look at you like you're crazy when you suggest that you could inspire the best in people this way, versus, you know, trying to like beat them down from the outside in order to motivate them. So I love that you talked about this, and I love that you're doing this for your athletes. There was something that came to mind while you were speaking, and I can't remember what it was. But as far as those negative effects, like you were talking about how some people will go on, they have great lives, and other people will always feel like they have this internal thing going on because of the way that they were motivated or coached or mentored. And I'm wondering if you're seeing any of that in, you know, your counterparts, like former athletes that are now living life, right? No longer competing, but they're in real life and they're trying to do their thing. Do you see possible effects from that, like that happening now in the people that you know?
I am. You know, I'm going to talk about some stuff that's maybe not appropriate for kids at this point, but you know, I do think it's important to know that, you know, I've had from some of the posts that I've written, I've had old teammates that have messaged me and said, you know, from me allowing to be verbally abused, and some of them physically abused by their coaches, they went on to have sexual abuse happen to them. And some people may say this is a little dramatic, but you know what? This is exactly what it can lead to. It can lead to our young girls thinking that they're not worth it and that they can't question what's happening and that it's okay. I think that's the biggest thing is, as a parent, when you say it's okay for my child to be fear-based coached and verbally abused, meaning saying like, what are you, stupid? You know, phrases of that sort, it's programming them to believe that that's okay and appropriate for them to be taught that way. And so what it can lead to, not always, but it can lead to being in relationships of that sort, or being in a situation where they get even worse, which is verbally or sexually abused. And I think it's a huge issue. And it's a big concern of mine, and it's not something that I'm willing to not speak about.
Yeah. And that's a huge concern for me too, because I have 5 daughters and I've coached teenage athletes for almost 2 decades. And this is something that's really come on my radar recently. I think people have just no idea. Like, I think they also feel like that's kind of an exaggeration, like just because, you know, this and that. But when I see these teenage athletes being spoken to in ways, and it's not always swearing or it's not always super, you know, but like you said, like, what are you, stupid? Like, just things like that are just, you wouldn't want your child being spoken to like that in different environments, maybe from teachers or from their significant other, but yet we allow coaches to do that to them. And yeah, like you said, it's like, it's accepted. It's okay at this point in a lot of situations. And I have seen it for myself. I have seen it play out, like you said, down the road, or I've seen it in their relationships where if they make a mistake and they upset their boyfriend's like reaming them and like talking to them in ways that you really wouldn't want your daughter spoken to, but they like, well, their coach does that to them, or, you know. And so I think that we send that message that like, it's okay if you mess up and it's your fault because you made a mistake or you didn't listen to what I said, then I have the right to then scream and yell at you and berate you, and you know, and then I see that play out in their relationships and stuff. So it's a major thing, and I've said to some people, like, this needs to change in youth sports, and I don't know that anyone, like, I don't think that a lot of people ever even think about it. So like the fact that you've even thought about it, or you know, that you've kind of helped make that correlation too. And I said in one of the Facebook groups the other day, and there are lots of guys that were offended because I had mentioned how like a girl had swung at a pitch, and so her coach was like yelling at her because he had told her not to swing at this first pitch. And I just said, like, I don't think that, well, she should have been yelled at for that, much less, you know, between a male coach and a female athlete, and people were really offended. But I'm like, that dynamic is different. I think it is anyway. And I think that their impact, like male impact on female teenage athletes, is huge. I think it's a powerful position to be in, and I think they can make a massive impact, either positively or negatively. And I think that all of us, even female coaches, it's not only males that are doing, it's not only, you know, it's females to females, females to males, males to females, but I think we could all be a lot more mindful of, like you said, how we're choosing to lead our, you know, young athletes. And whether we coach boys or girls, whether we are men or women, we're leading our children. And so I think that for me, because I have a bunch of kids, like that's a big deal, like how we choose to lead them. So I'm very thankful that someone like you, with your background, your history, and the level of play that you've been at, is speaking on these things, talking about it, and someone who is doing things differently, even if not a lot of people are. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Have you found anyone, like any parents or anything, kind of push back against it, or tell you need to do differently, or tell you need to yell more, or like that happen?
You know, what's funny is, you know, what I know of is that my parents are pretty happy with, you know, how I communicate with my girls. I think the main thing is I have girls now coming in, and, you know, it's become more rewarding to me because they're coming to me and talking to me about being bullied. they're coming and talk to me about personal things that are going on in their life. And it's become more than just teaching them a skill. They trust me. There's trust being built, and so they can have the conversations that maybe they can't have in other environments. And so I think the main pushback that I see is that for some reason, fear-based coaching, it works. We all know this. It does work. Right?
Yeah.
So it seems like those coaches, the teams are successful. Yeah. And unfortunately, I see that parents are willing to make excuses for it in order to their child to stay on a team that is successful. And I don't blame them for it. I think it's something that you have to come into an understanding about. 5 years ago, I probably would not have felt the same way I feel now. But what I'm realizing, and there's a difference between discipline and berating. There's a difference between building up and empowering and beating them down. And the truth is that we can coach them and empower them and make them feel good about themselves when we live in a world that is constantly telling us that we're not skinny enough, we're not smart enough, we're not fit enough, all of those things. So sports is supposed to be an outlet to have fun and for these girls to be able to express who they are. And when they're not even given that, they're in a situation where there's more fear created. It's like, what type of kids are we creating? And, again, I think we're all human, and I think, unfortunately, we only know when we know. And I just hope that in me speaking out and consistently posting on the subject, that I will force some coaches to sort of evaluate and try to start making some changes. It's not about us being perfect, because we're human, but are you willing to look at the way that you're doing things and say, maybe this isn't working. Maybe this is not how I want my daughter to look at what a relationship is like. Maybe it's okay. Maybe I want my girls to question their coaching. Maybe I want them, I try to empower my girls to stand up to their coaches, not just look at them as they're a dictator and I have no say. It's okay to ask questions. And it's really okay when a coach yells at them to stop crying and being a baby, for them to look at their coach and say, I'm not okay with you saying that to me. So not only is it important for us to teach our girls, and I'm speaking about girls, and then I know boys are just important in all this, but I work with girls, so I tend to think for girls. I think it's important not only for us to teach them how they should be spoken to, but also teach them that it's okay for them to set boundaries. And it's okay for them to say, I'm not okay with speaking to me that way. And that's difficult when you're 10, 11, or 12 years old. But I think if they constantly hear, like, that's not okay, and it's okay for you to stand up for yourself and set a limit, that's not being disrespectful. And I think that's the next step, is empowering our children to be able to stand up for who they are.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that as far as, these young athletes go, I think a lot of them feel like they don't have a say, and that's kind of scary when you're, for the girls, like, growing up. That's not how we want them to feel. And I don't know if people realize, like, I really believe that our children learn how to interact with others, or, like you said, how relationships work through our interactions with them. Not so much how they see us interacting in our relationships, but like how we interact with them becomes how they understand relationships and interacting with other people. And that I've been a parent for 21 years, and I've only realized this stuff recently, and even coaching. So like you said, just like you, I think in 5 years ago, if you've asked me these same questions or talked about these same things, that I would have a completely different viewpoint. And I've definitely made that same choice, like you were saying, about having your kids coached by someone where they're getting results. And so you're like, well, I'm willing to sacrifice this or compromise on these things because I want these results. And so that's a real issue. Like, that's a real thing that parents are going through, and they want the best for their child. So they're trying to put them in the best situation with the most opportunity. And sometimes we're willing to sacrifice certain things. And I learned the hard way that, like, compromising on things that you really strongly believe in or feel that shouldn't be happening or whatnot, like compromising those things is never a good idea. So it's easy for me to say now, you know, like there are certain things I won't compromise. Or if there's literally no other choice, or you feel like there's no other choice, or like, well, this is the only place my daughter can play, or this is the only team that she can play with, then I think it's important to have conversations about it and talk with them about like, look, we are here, but just know that we don't think these things are okay. And if you ever feel X, Y, or Z, you know, like just have those open lines of communication. And I think it's awesome that you have built so much trust with your athletes that they're coming to you to talk about things that, like you said, maybe they can't speak about elsewhere. So that's awesome. And I have found that that's kind of a side effect of not using fear-based methods, of, you know, really being positive and uplifting, even with my own children. And they actually come and talk to me a lot more. So parents are always, of teenagers especially, they're like, my kid never listens to me. Like, how do I get them to talk? And I have found, at least for me, that a lot of it has to do with what I'm doing, like how I'm showing up and how I'm treating them. So I think it's awesome that you have that going, and that you're able to build that trust. And I think that a lot of coaches are wondering how to do that, and a lot of parents too. So I appreciate everything that you do, and I definitely look forward to staying in touch. I'm sure there's lots of other things they could ask you, but I promise to kind of keep this short and sweet. So thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else that you would like coaches or parents or even athletes to hear before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things I just kind of wrote a note on. One is, as a coach, when we react like, oh, in disappointment, we're basically telling our players we're disappointed in them. And in that moment, we're telling them you're not good enough. Mm-hmm. And right there in that moment, that tells them, I can't do this, right? Mm-hmm. So I find that when I'm throwing front toss to my girls and they don't hit a good swing, you know, they think in their mind, wasn't a good swing. They'll make the sound like, oh, disappointment. And I'll say, good job. And they kind of like look at me like, I don't quite understand why. And I say, you know why? Because you need to take 10,000 more swings before you can start critiquing yourself. And then when you get there, they take 10,000 more. And they've learned that from other coaches and from us as people. And I will say, I'm guilty of this in the past as well, is anytime we show disappointment, they learn that from us. And the one other word that I think is extremely important that, you know, in my process of not becoming an athlete and people asking me, how did you get there? And ultimately, really, when I think about it, I trusted myself. When I was in the box, when I was hitting, I trusted myself. And so for me, it was like, how do I create trust in my players? And so everybody will say, don't strike out. You can't strike out. And I say, that's not true, because you're going to strike out no matter what way you look at it, you're going to strike out. And so did you strike out trusting yourself, or did you strike out not trusting yourself? So my example is always, if you have 2 strikes and you think the pitch is a ball and you don't swing and you strike out, trusting yourself. That's a positive. That is a successful at bat. But if you have 2 strikes in the back of your head, you're thinking, I just don't want to strike out. So you try to foul off a pitch that you think the umpire might call, and you swing and miss and you strike out. You're not trusting yourself. So in essence, you're not getting that much closer to a successful, positive self-talk. So trust is the biggest thing. And how do we teach that is they have to ultimately rely on themselves. So how do we teach that is, you know, you have to be able to feel what you're doing, and you have to learn how to make your own adjustments outside of other people telling you what to do. So trust is a big word for me.
I love that. And I think what frustrates me a lot of times is when I see coaches just trying to make every decision, and I'm like, how are they going to learn? Like, how are they going to learn to do this for themselves if we're the ones that are constantly like, do this, do this, do this, do this. And so I love when coaches are able to instill what you're talking about. And I think that I like, it's interesting because like, I know this, right? Like in my brain, like I've been in the past few years, like super, on this mission, especially with my own children, because I'm not coaching right now, but they're like obviously super important to me. So it's like, I'm super aware of like my reactions are important, and I still mess it up every single day. So, you know, like coaches, like this is not to like put you, you know, if you've done these things to put you down or anything like that, like you said, we're all human. And especially if we were trained in that way, it's going to be our knee-jerk reaction. But the more aware we are and the more consciously we can choose our reactions, the better it's going to be. But like this is a huge thing for me, and I still mess it up. So so just to encourage other people, like just keep trying, like just keep going, just because you don't get it right. And it's okay to apologize too, you know, like, and be like, I shouldn't have done that. And so and I always find it interesting how I just feel like if we really had full confidence in our children or in our athletes and in ourselves to lead them, we wouldn't even feel like reacting that way. We wouldn't be worried or upset or frustrated over one mistake. We would know that it's just a part of their journey. It's just one step, and they're going to get better because of it. So I try to keep that in mind a lot, especially with my own kids, because it's like every day there's something, right? So I just love everything that you've shared today. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here. And we'll definitely keep in touch. So thank you so much. Anything else you want to say?
That's it. Thanks so
You're
much
good?
for having me on. Appreciate it.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you.